ReMind really proved that Osaka team can actually make very good and balanced action combat for Kingdom Hearts. Not only Sora, but the boss design is incredible. Before ReMind, I said that I'd be happy if we get like 3 spectacular bosses, but we got like 10. So I'm beyond ecstatic to see where the combat goes from here. And with the new Kingdom Hearts game, hopefully coming out later this year, that may or may not have playable sections in the KH3 engine, I thought it'd be fun if I made a video detailing on a bunch of mechanics they can update that would make the combat even more fun. Now, I'd like to make it clear that this is only from my perspective of what I think KH combat should be like. I think encouraging creative and different playstyles with multiple keyblades is the best way to advance the combat. You're free to agree or disagree with it. I'll also only be talking about Sora's combat. Talking about the party members or boss design will make this a lot longer than it already is. We will start off by talking about the situation command meter. I'll be referring to that as SC from now on because that's a mouthful. Although I don't agree with the randomness, we'll talk about that later, I think they should reward you with increasing a good portion of the gauge if you play well. One thing that I've said many times on Twitter before is that them making the gauge bigger in critical mode is okay, but they should at least give us a way to increase it faster for smarter players. I think the easiest way to do it is by adding a lot to the gauge if you do a critical counter and a final blow. It would heavily encourage players to always get that critical guard, which I think is a great mechanic itself, but making it also give you more SC will encourage players to also try and get that critical guard every single time. It's a very high risk and high reward thing in critical mode, which is always a good thing. Plus, Kingdom Hearts has never really encouraged defensive play, and this will definitely be a good way to do that. I also think that it should be the critical counters plus final blow only that should add to the meter. Since you can guard multiple times in quick succession, it can get a bit broken. That's why it is just a measure to balance everything out. So how it'll work is that critical guards will enable you to get more SC meter by countering, using a final blow, or risk dodges. I think countering should give you 2 or 3 times the amount you'd get from a single hit on each enemy. So just using counter slash on one enemy will add +2 or +3 to the meter if you count it by hits. But I hope you can see that you can also be creative with this. If you're surrounded by mobs in a mob fight, then you can use counter impact to hit multiple mobs, which could add like +10 to your meter. But then you'd also lose the range that counter slash has. Then I think final blows should add an entire arrow, and risk dodge counters should add like 1.5 arrows because they are a lot more rare. And I'll say this again, this should only be the case for critical counters. Oh, and if you don't know what final blow is, it's just the follow-up attack that Sora does after a counter. Hopefully I was able to explain that adding this neat little critical guard feature can add tons of depth to your positioning, strategizing, and skill to get the critical guard, of course. Now moving right along, I'd like to talk about counters for a bit. I think all counters / impact and kick are fantastic, but they could make it so that Sora could use all 3 counters at once. Some of you might think it might be a bit broken, but that would also add so much depth to efficiently counter depending on the situation. For example, counter impact has very little end lag, which results in doing stuff like this. Of course, you can do this with slash and kick as well, but it's much more efficient and better and safer to do with counter impact. But if you have impact equipped, it gets a lot more difficult to counter these 2 moves consistently in that fight. It's much easier to do them with counter slash. You can find a similar case with Zigbar, where this move is much easier to counter with counter kick. Of course, there's an example with mob fights as well. With kick, you can counter something that's pretty far away, but with impact you can have AoE. This is why I believe Sora should be able to use all 3 counters at once. It'll just give us more options to play around with and reward efficient play. As for which buttons they might be binded to, I don't know, maybe you can hold like L2 and R2 and that might bring up another shortcut menu for counters. I'm sure they could figure something out. Now, I don't just want depth to counters but also final blows as well. As you probably know, counters plus final blows in KH3 always leaves the enemy in the air, which I honestly think is kinda stupid. What if I don't want to use air combos after a counter? Yes, I could use Groundbreaker, but that's probably the worst combo modifier in KH3 after like Magic Flash. Why can't I directly attack the enemy downwards from a final blow? I think they can make it so that if you press X, Sora will do a blow that leaves the enemy in the air, and if you hold X or maybe like double tap X, Sora can do a quick pounce that'll bring the enemy down with him to the ground. Is it just me who thinks this would be the coolest thing? It could add a lot of variety to how you can handle things. Since I've touched on this a little bit in the last point, let me explain it a bit more here. If any of you have played DMC, one of the more underappreciated combat features it has in my opinion is its fantastic air to ground and ground to air moves. I think the only really good ground to air move KH has ever had is finishing leap in KH2 and like zero air to ground moves. We have Groundbreaker, but I don't consider that an attack. It feels like you're hitting someone with one of those toy balloons. Now you may be thinking, but Saxer, Double Form has a good air to ground and ground to air move. And you're absolutely right. And although it's a bit more situational, Hyper Hammer, Blizzard Blades and Drill Punch also has great air to ground moves. But the problem with those are that they are situational. I'm specifically talking about the attacks that Sora can trigger by pressing a button. For base Sora, I want something like finishing leap to come back and not just be a combo modifier in like a form. I also want a good air to ground move. I want something that brings down the enemy with Sora with maybe like a Keyblade Slam or something. And wouldn't it be fantastic if all of the forms had their own air to ground and ground to air moves? Okay, all of the forms doesn't make sense, but at least strike forms and the white and black forms should have good air to ground and ground to air moves. This might not bother many of you, but think of all the cool possibilities if that was possible. I tried to do a DMC style combo in KH3 not too long ago with tons of altitude changing moves and it looks pretty cool, but it's also incredibly difficult to pull off because of the limited altitude changing moves we have at the moment.
It's on.
And now I'd like to move on to the forms and some of the glaring issues the forms have along with them. Of course, the previous point of them not having good combo modifiers to change altitude still stands. Now, in my opinion, Blitz form is fundamentally flawed. It does not have anything of note that's really unique to it. Like you can tell these forms are strike form because they have that Omega Finale ability, which lets you do instant finishers, which is really cool. Guardian form also has like really good guards and defensive abilities like Withstand Combo and Second Chance. While Element form is kinda similar to Blitz form in this regard, at least it can boost your magic with Magic Galvanizer and is all about beams and hitting stuff from a distance most of the time. Now I may just be dumb, but I can't think of a single thing that sets Blitz form apart from these. Yes, it has Glide and another Air Slide, but that's it. I don't personally see how gliding relates to speed, which is what I assume Blitz is all about, cause there are speed medals in Union Cross. When I think of Blitz form, the thing that it should do is give Sora an immense amount of mobility that other forms just don't do, and Glide plus 1 Air Slide does not do that in the slightest. Now Dante's Trickster style in DMC is what I imagine Blitz form is supposed to be like. I'm not suggesting that KH copied DMC or anything, but you cannot deny the similarities. But that style is really all about mobility. In Trickster, you can go from air to ground and ground to air in an instant. You can close in on enemies incredibly fast, and I want speed form to do that. Plus, give me options to like teleport behind enemies, unique dodges, unique parries. Speed is consistently the attribute which is really cool to see in most action sequences. Just them being really fast and hitting enemies is incredibly cool to see. Well, enough about that. Speed form in KH3 is one of the things that I haven't talked about very much, but it really does leave a sour taste in my mouth. Now that we're done talking about speed form, I'd like to move on to element form. I mainly think element form is heavily underutilized. It has some really cool stuff like Mirage stuff, leaving behind clones, but I think there is just not enough things to do with them because they are basically linked with two keyblades, which is stupid. While I don't have many problems with dual aeroguns itself, it raises the biggest issue I have with this form. Element form is supposed to be all about magic, right? Well, why is the only interesting magic we have in element form the multiple cast in dual aeroguns? It makes no sense that only one form actually does anything to your magic. The rest are basically the same. Strike form again gives you a good bit of freedom with your combos because of Omega Finale. It changes your strikes, but why doesn't element form change your magic at all? This is probably one of the stupidest thing in KH3's combat. Where are the utility magic? KH2 and KH1 had defensive magic in Reflect and Aero. KH3 has none. Eroga in KH1 deflects almost every projectile and Reflect reflects everything. Why do we not have defensive magic? We have an okay AoE in Aero, which is good, but what about the defensive magic? Using the Naga with Master Form in KH2 makes Sora dance around with a couple of lightning strikes back to back. Even something like that would be really cool. I've said this many times before, but element form could have been the way they implement commands from DDG, BBS, and Chain of Memories. Like imagine when you're in a form and you press fire and it creates a wall of fire around you, like Raging Storm, but it also continuously drains your MP until you turn it back off by pressing it again. And this can work with every element because it's bound to that form. It should hit enemies sort of like Aero did in KH1, if you made contact with them, that is. They can add other forms that can give the player surges from BBS. They gave Master Form Fire Surge in KH2. I mean, yes, it was before the surges actually became a thing, but it's still a surge. Why can't Sora do that in KH3? It makes zero sense. Master Form, Wisdom Form, and Final Form also had unique casts for Blizzard, which was extremely cool. Final Form magic finishers are probably my favorite cast animations in the entire series. Like look at this, these look so cool. All we have in KH3 is an AoE and projectile. At least make them slightly different in element forms. Dual Guns does this with the multiple cast, which is cool. But there should have been more, especially since it's not bound to element form because Honey Blasters can also do it. And I will go into that a little bit later on. Do you understand what I'm getting at? Why isn't element form doing anything to enhance Sora's elemental prowess? I really do hope this changes in the future and we get a lot more out of magic. Since we don't have a water-based Keyblade yet, I really thought we'd get one in ReMind, and that would have been our third Keyblade associated with element form, since Guardian form, Strike form, and Blitz form all have at least 3 Keyblades with their form. Every other form got equal amounts of love, but not element form. Now I don't have a problem with Guardian form itself. I think it gets the job done and it's okay. Only talking about Counter Shield, by the way. Because the other two are form clones. I will never ever understand why they decided that hey, let's make 2, technically 3 damn clones, but not make another element form. And just only give them barrier. That would be really cool and fair to all of the forms. Like why do these 2 forms exist? Is it good to have them with barrier? Yes, of course, but would I prefer that we got one brand new form instead of 2 reskins but with basically one new ability? Absolutely yes. I almost never use Honey Spout or Classic Toon. Honey Spout does have a pretty useful feature of slowing down enemies, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that it's just a reskin of one of my favorite forms. But Classic Toon has like nothing going on for it except for maybe the shot lock, and even then, that's bound to the Keyblade and not the form. So yeah, it's stupid. Oh, and don't think Grand Chef gets out of this unscathed. Oh no, that's probably the worst thing, because it literally is just a reskin of Counter Shield, gains absolutely zero thing for being in speed form, and also gets negative points for being one of the 2 elementals linked with a shield. You see, Thunder and Fire are linked with Guardian form and a Dollar Store Guardian form. Blizzard is in speed form. What does Strike form have? Nothing. Well, I guess that's technically false because some of Stormflag's attacks have wind and water elemental to them, but it's not all of the attacks. Frying Pan, Counter Shield, and Blizzard Blades have their specific elemental in each of their attacks. That's nice. Honestly, I want a Fire and Thunder Shield, but definitely not a Fire Spear or a Thunder Hammer. Nope, definitely not. Oh, and Elemental form doesn't have any elementals linked with it. Very nice, isn't it? Why would Element form have any elements linked with it? It's not like we got a completely new element that wasn't in any other game, and we also don't have a Keyblade based on that element, which could have been perfect to bind with Element form. Nope. Those were probably the biggest things that I want to discuss, but now I kind of have some smaller things that I'd like to talk about. The smallest thing being, for some weird reason, Blizzard's end lag in KH3 is a lot more than other spells. I don't know if this is intentional or if it was just overlooked, but it feels really awkward to use Blizzard multiple times in a row when its casting takes this long. Another thing is, I think you should keep Keyblade abilities when you switch Keyblades in a combo for the duration of the combo. Like Blizzard Blades have Blizzard Boost, so after you do an attack and switch Keyblades, you keep the Blizzard Boost ability as long as the combo continues. This could just add a little more depth to Keyblade switching. Some abilities like Berserk Charge doesn't work with forms, which is stupid. If you don't know, Berserk Charge allows you to continue your combos forever by making you not be able to use finishers as long as you're in MP Charge. Imagine if you could do a very long combo with Strike Form with Berserk Charge equipped, but still be able to do finishers because of Omega Finale. It could also work with abilities like Magic Galvanizer, which boosts your magic the longer your combo is. You might be wondering, how can you use magic if you're in MP Charge? Well, you can build up Grand Magic and then use it. Yes, it can be a bit broken, I admit, but it can also be a reward to creative players for using a lot of different things at your disposal. Since I just mentioned Grand Magic, let me get this out of the way. Grand Magic being random is absolute bullshit. In my opinion, every cast should add like 25% to your SC meter so you can get Grand Magic 100% of the time if you use a spell 4 times, which is the amount you usually can do in critical mode anyway, before your MP runs out, that is. This can be pretty balanced. In order to spam it, you're gonna need to have a lot of ethers. I think it could work really well. And there's also attack cancelling. Now, I flat out don't think that you should be able to cancel finishers, but I think a regular attack cancelling could work really well. And I have the perfect idea for it. We should have a feature that lets you instantly air step to a locked on enemy in a pretty close range. What do I mean by that? What I'm saying is, just make it so that we can do this, but without the need to load the focus UI. And since we already can air step, just make it a bit more fluid by making it so that we don't have to go to an extra menu. Like this can trigger if the player presses R1 and square together. I think this could add so much fluidity and options to KH combat. Now they could do the regular air step animation, but I think just a teleport would be the best, just like the animation for this specific wrist dodge. Everything could flow really well if something like this was implemented. Though I do think the range of this should be a bit more limited to make it balanced. And not gonna lie, this was the point that inspired this entire video because I've been thinking about this for quite a while now. The last thing is better and more fluid Keyblade switching, and since everyone wants this, I actually have made a video on this topic a couple of months ago that if you want to, you can check out by pressing the iCard in the top right corner. I'll also have a link in the description. So yeah. Well, that is the end of this video. I really thank you for making it all the way through. It's a really long video. Now, I really don't like plugging stuff in videos, but since you watched this long ass video in its entirety, I think it's safe to assume that you have some sort of an interest as to what I have to say. If you would, follow me on Twitch. It's not Saxer on Twitch. I'll have a link in the description because I plan on streaming a bit more seriously. I sometimes stream on YouTube, but I want to stream on Twitch. And as to when I'm gonna be streaming, honestly, I'm not sure about that right now. If you want to get updates, be sure to follow me on Twitter as well because that's where I'm gonna be posting updates. I'd really appreciate it if you do that. And yeah, okay, bye.